So if you put together a timeline of the history of Macedonia, we have to go back, we actually have to go back between 3500 and 7000 BC, because the oldest artifacts that are found in the country are dated back to then. So we know that there's history in that time period. We also know that King Karanis was the first recorded king of Macedonia, and he ruled from 808 to 788. So that really starts the recorded history, and that's BC, right? So we're talking about 2,700, 2,800 years ago. Who knows who Alexander II was? Meto knows who Alexander II was. You know who. Who is Alexander II? It was who to Alexander III? You said? Yeah, before Alexander III, absolutely. Alexander II was a king of Macedonia. When he died, Philip II, not this Philip, but his brother, Philip II, became king. Philip II was very aggressive and interested in expanding Macedonia, and he turned Macedonia into the preeminent power in Europe. He had a military vision, he had an expansionist vision. He was assassinated, and his son, Alexander III, becomes king. Now, Alexander III was born in 358, I think, somewhere around that time period, 356. And he died in 323 at the age of 32. Who was Alexander III? He was Alexander the Great, exactly. He ruled for only 12 years. He became king at age 20. But like his father, he had an amazing expansionist vision for what the empire should be. So here's an old mosaic of Alexander as a warrior. And in his 12 years, he expanded the empire into Asia Minor, all the way out into Asia, down into India, up against India here, into Egypt. He owned virtually the eastern end of the Mediterranean. This was a remarkable accomplishment for somebody at that young age. And he died at age 32. Does anybody know how he died? Did he die in battle? He died of a fever. Yes, in fact he did. So I'd like to tell you the story about how Alexander died, because I found it to be, as a medically oriented person, I found it to be a fascinating story. He's in Babylon at the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II. And it turns out that Alexander the Great was a party animal. So he's entertaining his admiral. And they're out drinking and partying together. Instead of wrapping it up at a reasonable hour, 11 or 12 o'clock at night, they party all night, all the next day, into the next night, and they're exhausted. Within 3 days, Alexander has a fever, and the fever doesn't go away. In 14 days, he's dead. So now the question becomes, what happened? And where did he get this fever? What was the kind of infection? Because back 323 BC, medicine wasn't what it is today. And we're still pretty crude when we think about even modern medicine. It's the best we can do, but it's still, there's a lot we don't know. The original speculation was that he had either malaria or typhoid fever. All right, then you're nodding your head. So if I say anything incorrect, you can make sure I straighten it up here. The original speculation was malaria or typhoid fever. There was also speculation that during his partying binge with the admiral, that his wine was poisoned and tainted. That speculation is thought not to be true. And in 1998, there was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that speculated about the death of Alexander. And the 1998 article talked about Alexander, and it speculated that it was typhus or possibly meningitis. Now, why meningitis? The idea was, and it's recorded, that as he was dying, he was becoming increasingly paralyzed. And the paralysis would go back to the spinal cord. Meningitis is a spinal cord problem. So basically, this is what we know about his death. That he was he probably picked up an infection somewhere along the way. And in those years, remember, now today, what's the average life expectancy of a human being today? Women 85, men 82, something like that, right? And why do we live so long? The answer is one word: antibiotics. If we didn't have antibiotics, we wouldn't be able to live so long, and the average life expectancy back then was probably mid-30s. Why? Infections that could not be cured. And Alexander the Great succumbed to an infection for which there was no cure. So now we'll go back to our timeline. And when he died, so he's got generals, right, who are helping him to control this whole area, this whole huge area. He had no heir. And his son was actually born after his death. So when he dies, his generals now go into a state of civil war. And the civil war results in a breakup of his empire. And the breakup of his empire causes increased weakness and weakness upon weakness. At the same time, now this weakness continues, and at the same time now we're getting close to about 148 BC. And in 148 BC, the Romans are now expanding, and they're knocking on the door of Macedonia. And it didn't take long for Macedonia to become part of the Roman Empire. This continued, and of course then we see in 325. Who would we expect to see in 325? Constantine, exactly. It was Constantine. Now, Constantine becomes emperor, and wanting to be near the front, changes the capital to the city that becomes Constantinople, right? And then later in 1930 becomes Istanbul. So it was Constantinople for a very long time, reflecting his name. This, by convention, by 395, by today, modern day convention, the Roman Empire actually was a continuous empire, but we split it into the Byzantine Empire, reflecting the name of the ancient city Byzantium, which became Constantinople, and then and the western part of the Roman Empire. As time goes along, of course, there's still increasing fighting going on, and the Roman Empire starts to crumble and becomes weak. But before I get to the Ottomans, I wanted to talk about the year 867, and who is Basil I? Basil I was the king of what we today call the Byzantine Empire. He was the first Macedonian to become king of the empire. So now Macedonia enters its golden age, and the golden age continues until about 1025. So right about in the middle of the Dark Ages, right? Because the Dark Ages went from 600 to 1400, something in there. So right about in the middle of the Dark Ages, we have a Macedonian king, or in the early portion, and this age of the golden age of Macedonia continues until about 1025. But now there's more conflict, things start to weaken, and by 1371, the Macedonia becomes a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire. By the end of the 1400s, Macedonia is completely integrated into the Ottoman Empire, and that stays for some time. In fact, 500 years.